Hello, welcome to another reading of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Chapter 4. I hope you guys enjoyed that last chapter. There's a lot of big reveals occurring at this point. There's a lot of setting up of characters. You're seeing a lot of what drives Edmund, Dante's character, quite a bit. You see the people that he surrounded himself with. You see his love interest. You see the people that are plotting against him in many ways. Really interesting writing style, quite a bit in this. I'm liking the pacing that the writer has for this, because the screenplay for the older movie was very vastly different. By the end of this, we might do a watch party. I've been saying this quite a bit. We're still at the very beginning of this story, so there's quite a bit that we have left. We haven't even hit the juicy part of when he arrives in the prison, which I feel like there's going to be a lot that maybe the movies haven't necessarily discussed. And I'm excited to see what they're going to cover in that, because I have a feeling like there's a lot in this book that the movies haven't been able to touch on quite a bit. But as of right now, I hope you grab your blankies and grab your snackies, because it's time for Chapter 4 of The Count of Monte Cristo. Chapter 4, The Betrothal Feast. The next day was gloriously fine. The sun rose red and resplendent, its first rays tinting the fleecy clouds with many delicate and brilliant hues. The festive board had been prepared in a large room at La Reserve, with whose arbor we are already acquainted. Although the meal was fixed for noon, the tavern had been filled with impatient guests since 11 o'clock. They consisted chiefly of some of the favored sailors of the Pharaon, and several soldiers, friends of Dante's. In order to do honor to the happy couple, they had all donned their finest clothes. To crown all, M. Morel had determined to favor the occasion with his presence, and on his arrival he had greeted with hearty cheers from the sailors of the Pharaon. Their owner's presence was, to them, a confirmation of the report that Dante's was to be their captain, and as he was popular with them all, they wished to show their owner by this means their appreciation of the fact that by a stroke of good luck his choice coincided with their wishes on the subject. Donglers and cateros were immediately dispatched to inform the bridegroom of the arrival of this important personage, whose entrance had caused such a sensation to bid him make haste. They had barely gone 100 yards when they perceived the small bridal party approaching. It was composed of the betrothed pair, four maids in attendance on the bride, and Dante's father, who walked beside Mercedes. Fernand walked behind wearing an evil smile. Neither Edmund nor Mercedes noticed this evil smile. They were so happy that they had eyes only for each other, and for the beautiful blue sky whence they hoped would come a blessing on their union. Having acquainted themselves on their errand, the two ambassadors shook hands amicably with Edmund, and while Danglars took his place beside Fernand, Caderousse joined old Dantes, who was the subject of general attention as he walked along, supporting himself on his curiously carved stick. He was attired in his best black suit, adorned with large steel buttons beautifully cut in facet. His thin but still vigorous legs were arrayed in a pair of beautifully embroidered stockings, which had obviously been smuggled from England. Long blue and white streamers flowed from his three-cornered hat. Dantes himself was simply clad. He had belonged to the Mercantile Marine. His uniform was half military, half civilian, and with his good-looking face radiant with joy and happiness, a more perfect specimen of manly beauty could scarcely be imagined. As the bridal party came in sight of La Reserve, M. Morel advanced to meet them, followed by the soldiers and sailors and other guests. Dantes at once withdrew his arm from that of his betrothed and placed Mercedes' arm respectfully in that of his patron. The ship owner and the blushing girl then led their way up the wooden steps to the room where the feast was prepared. For fully 5 minutes the boards creaked and groaned under the unwonted pressure of many steps. No sooner were they seated than the dishes were handed round. Arly sausages, brown of meat and piquant of flavor, lobsters and prawn in brilliant red shells, sea urchin whose prickly interiors resemble chestnuts just fallen from the trees, cockles esteemed by the epicure of the south as surpassing the oyster of the north. In fact, every delicacy which the sea washes up onto the sandy beach and which the fishermen call sea fruit. What a silent party, old Dantes remarked as he caught a whiff of the fragrant yellow wine that Pamphil himself had just put before Mercedes. Who would think there were 30 light-hearty and merry people assembled here? A husband is not always light-hearted, Caderousse replied. In fact, said Dantes, at the present moment I am too happy to be gay. If that is what you mean by your remark, neighbor Caderousse, you are quite right. Joy has that peculiar effect that at times it oppresses us just as much as grief. Danglars looked at Fernand, whose impressionable nature was keenly alive to every emotion. Well, I never, he said. Are you anticipating trouble? It seems to me you have everything you can desire. That is just what alarms me, said Dantes. I cannot help thinking it is not man's lot to attain happiness so easily. Good fortune is like a, the palaces of the enchanted isles, the gates of which were guarded by dragons. Happiness could only be obtained by overcoming these dragons, and I know not how I have deserved the honor of becoming Mercedes' husband. Husband, said Caderousse, laughing. Nay, captain, not yet. Act towards her as if you were husband, and you will see how she will like it. Mercedes blushed, but made no reply. Fernand grew very restless. He started to he started at every sound and from time to time wiped away the perspiration that gathered from his brow like large drops of rain, the precursor of a storm. Upon my word, neighbor Cadros, it is hardly worth while taking notice of such a little slip on my part, Dante said. 'Tis true that Mercedes is not yet my wife, but here he pulled out his watch. She will be in an hour and a half. Yes, my friends, thanks to the influence of Monsieur Morel, to whom, after my father, I owe all I possess. Every difficulty has been removed. We have got a special license, and at 2:30, the mayor of Marseille will be awaiting us at Hotel de Ville. As it has just struck 1:15, I think I am quite right in saying that in another hour and 30 minutes, Mercedes will have changed her name to Madame Dantes. Fernand closed his eyes, for they gave him a burning pain. He leant against the table to save himself from falling, but in spite of his effort, he could not restrain a groan, which, however, was lost amid the noisy congratulations of the company. This feast, then, is not in honor of your betrothal, as we suppose, but is your wedding breakfast? Not at all, Dante said. I leave for Paris tomorrow morning. 4 days to go, 4 days to return, 1 day to execute my commission. And I shall be back again on the 1st of March. We will have our real wedding breakfast the very next day. At this moment, Danglars noticed that Fernand, on whom he had kept an observant eye, and who was seated at the window overlooking the street, suddenly opened his haggard eyes. rose with a movement and staggered back onto his seat. Almost at the same moment, a confused noise was heard on the stairs. The tread of heavy steps and the hubbub of many voices, together with the clanking of swords and military accoutrements, drowned the merry voices of the bridal party. The laughter died away. An ominous silence fell on all as the noise drew nearer, and when three peremptory knocks resounded on the door, they looked at each other with uneasy glances. Open, in the name of the law! Cried a peremptory voice. There was no answer. The door opened, and a police commissary entered, followed by four armed soldiers and a corporal. What is all of this? The shipowner asked, advancing towards the commissary, whom he knew, or commissary, before commissary, whom he knew. I fear there must be some mistake. If there is a mistake, Monsieur Morel, the commissary replied, you may rest assured that it will be promptly put right. In the meantime, I am the bearer of a warrant for arrest, and though I regret the task assigned me, it must nevertheless be carried out. Which of you gentlemen answered to the name of Edmond Dantes? Every eye was turned on the young man as he stepped forward, obviously agitated, but with great dignity of bearing, and said, I do, monsieur. What do you want of me? Edmond Dantes, I arrest you in the name of the law. You arrest me? Said Dantes, changing color. Why, I pray? I know not, monsieur. Your first examination will give you all information on that score. Resistance was useless, but old Dantes did not comprehend this. There are certain things the heart of a father or a mother will never understand. He threw himself at the officer's feet and begged and implored, but his tears and supplications were of no avail. There is no call for alarm, monsieur, the commissary said at last, touched by the old man's despair. Perhaps your son has but neglected to carry out some custom formality or health regulation, in which case he will probably be released as soon as he is given the desired information. In the meantime, Dantes, with a smile on his face, had shaken hands with all his friends and had surrendered himself to the officer, saying, do not be alarmed. You may depend on it, there is some mistake which will probably be cleared up even before I reach the prison. To be sure, I am ready to vouch for your innocence, Dangles said as he joined the group round the prisoners. Dantes descended the stairs, preceded by the police officers and surrounded by soldiers. A carriage stood at the door. He got in, followed by two soldiers and the commissary. The door was shut, and the carriage took the road back to Marseilles. Goodbye, Edmund. Oh, my Edmund, goodbye, Mercedes called out, leaning over the balcony. The prisoner heard these last words sobbed from his sweetheart's breasts, and putting his head out the window, simply called out, Au revoir, my Mercedes. The carriage then disappeared round the corner of the front of the Fort St. Nicholas. Await me here, Emerald said to the rest of the party. I shall take the first carriage I can find to take me to Marseilles, and shall bring you back news. Yes, do good, they all cried out. Go and come back with all possible speed. The guest, who had been making merry but a short time before, now gave way to a feeling of terror. They feverishly discussed the rest from each point of view. Donglers was loud in his assertions that it was merely a trifling case of suspected smuggling. The customs officials had been aboard the Pharaon during their absence, and something had been aroused their suspicion. Something had aroused their suspicion. M, the pursuer, was sure of it. But Mercedes felt rather than knew that the arrest had some deeper significance. She suddenly gave way to a wild fit of sobbing. Come, come, my child, do not give up hope, said old Dantes, hardly knowing what he was saying. Hope! Repeated Danglars. Fernand also tried to repeat this word, comfort, but it seemed to choke him. His lips moved, but no words came from them. A carriage! A carriage! Cried one of the guests, who had stayed on the balcony on the lookout. It is Monsieur Morel. Cheer up. He is no doubt bringing us good news. Mercedes and the old father rushed out the door to meet the shipowner. The latter entered, looking very grave. My friends, he said, with a gloomy shake of his head, it is far more serious matter than we supposed. Oh, Monsieur Morel, Mercedes exclaimed, I know he is innocent. I also believe in his innocence, replied the shipowner, but he is accused of being an agent of the Bonapartist faction. Those of my readers who are well acquainted with the period of my story must be aware of the gravity of such an announcement. Consternation and dismay were written on the faces of the assembled guests as the party silently and sadly broke up. Fernand, who had now become the horror stricken girl's only protector, led her home, while some of Edmund's friends took charge of the broken-hearted father, and it was soon rumored in the town that Dantes had been arrested as a Bonapartist agent. Would you have believed it, Danglars? And Morel asked as he hastened to the town with his pursuers, and Caderousse in the hopes of receiving direct news of Edmund through the acquaintance M. de Villefort, the deputy of the Procureur de Roi. Why, monsieur, you may perhaps remember I told you that Dantes anchored off the Isle of Elba without any apparent reason. I had my suspicions at the time. Did you mention these suspicions to anyone but myself? God forbid, exclaimed Danglars, and then in a low whisper he added, I know, monsieur, that on account of your uncle who served under the old government and does not attempt to hide his feelings, you are also suspected of sympathizing with Napoleon. So if I mention my suspicions, I should be afraid of injuring not only Edmund, but you also. There are certain things it is the duty of a subordinate to tell his master, but to conceal from everyone else. Quite right, Danglars. You are a good fellow. I had not forgotten your interests in the event of poor Dante's becoming captain. In what respect, monsieur? I asked Dantes to give me his opinion of you, and to say whether he would have any objection to your retaining your post, for it seemed to me that I had noticed a certain coolness between you two of late. What answer did he give you? He merely referred to some personal grievances he had against you, but said that any person who enjoyed his master's confidence was also sure of his. The hypocrite, Dantes muttered. Poor Dantes, said Caderousse. He's the right sort, and that's a fact. Quite agreed, said Emerel. But in the meantime, the Pharaon is captainless. We cannot put to sea for another 3 months, Danglars added, and it is to be hoped that Dantes will be released before then. No matter, but in the meantime, I am at your service. You know that I am as capable managing a ship as the most experienced captain. Then, when Dantes comes out to prison, he can take his post, and we will resume, and I will resume mine. Thanks, Danglars. That would be a way out of a difficulty. I therefore authorize you to assume command of the Pharaon and superintend the loading of the cargo. No matter what misfortune befalls any of us, we cannot let business suffer. So saying, He proceeded in the direction of the law courts. So far, everything is succeeding wonderfully, Dongler said to himself. I'm ready to. I'm already temporarily captain, and if that fool of a Cataros can be persuaded to hold his tongue, I shall soon have the job for good and all. And that concludes chapter 4. Wow! Chapter 5, The Deputy Procureur de Rue. That's going to be our next chapter for tomorrow. Wow, there's a lot of applauding occurring at this point, and Donglers suspiciously very vocal about his intentions at this point, right? So I didn't pick this up in the last chapter. I thought that Cataros was also plotting against Dante's in some way, but this chapter reveals that Cataros is kind of like just like a very in between character. He doesn't necessarily have moralities between the two sides, and he has convincing to be evil, but he doesn't have any leaning towards Edmund or loyalty in any way at the same time. And it kind of shows right here that Cataros seems to have some kind of like connection too with Donglers as well. But Donglers isn't necessarily like a planner. He's very much just like a very impulsive goon in some ways. But he doesn't seem to be the mastermind type. Neither does the other character of what's his name? Uh the cousin, uh Fernand. Fernand. Uh Fernand is almost completely just like emotional about his state with where he's at. And can't even like speak, let alone um, react to the events that are occurring in front of him. You know, he can hardly stand. He has to hold himself up on the table. He can't even do that. He kind of just like plots himself down, waiting for things to occur. He doesn't necessarily plan anything. He's just kind of like remorsed in like the events that are occurring. But Dogler seems to be the one that's plotting in this chapter, unlike the last chapter where he was still plotting, but it was more so without any direction. And I guess they kind of hinted in at the very end of the last chapter that he was going to do this, but um, now seeing it come to fruition, the beautiful wedding reception as well, the way that they described a lot of the military attire. I love the way that they described Edmund's attire being half military, half civilian. I've always really enjoyed those kinds of suits a lot. And I don't know if you guys really necessarily know those kinds of suits, but sailors and military sometimes have very similar attires to like mariachi kind of like attire too. That's the way that I would classify it. Like that kind of like mixture of military with civilian attire is very mariachi in my opinion, because mariachis have like those like really nice jacketed vest, but they have like the really nice embroidery all over it. It's very ceremonial in some ways, but it looks fancy, but it's also casual to wear in many occasions. I love that kind of style a lot. So I love the way that they described how Dante is very casual in his way, and it describes his character as well, because he is not necessarily nobility. He doesn't come from money. He's someone that had to work his entire life. So it makes obvious sense that he'd be dressed up in this kind of like military style, also coming from like a sailboat. uh, very cool indeed. They also described a lot of food in this, which I am starving right now. You guys can't see this, but I have a couple of sandwiches off to the side right now that I go eat because I didn't eat any dinner. So I'm gonna go fucking munch on some food. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed chapter 4 of Count of Monte Cristo. We'll be back tomorrow with some more for chapter 5. There's gonna be a couple boxes that will pop up on either side for the Grims and the Tales of Horror. Go check those out. Really cool playlist. There's a lot of really cool videos in there. Go check those out. Like the ones that you love. And I'll catch you all tomorrow on the next video. Bye. All right. Bye. 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 Bye.